Now let's see how Kubernetes deployment works. Now deployment is a way to deploy pods in Kubernetes, which will make sure the pods are running within a single deployment. So there could be one or more pods running within a deployment. Let's see how we can create a deployment. So if you use kubectl create deployment, which is shorter form is deploy, you can give a name called my web. That's the deployment name, and image is nginx. If you simply run this command, it will create a deployment. If you check the deployment, you say deploy, and that will show you the deployment, which is my web. Now, if you say deploy my web, that'll go in into that my web and tell you what exactly are the thing happening. Now, if you want to, let's say, um, look into the deployment and go and say describe. What happens over here, if you notice, it says that it is running within a namespace default, and there is a container called nginx, and image is nginx. And right now there is only one replica which is running. So under replicas, one is desired, one is updated, one is total, one is available, zero unavailable. Okay. And the strategy for rolling out new container image is a rolling update. All right. And you can see the revision number says 1. Now you can change the number of replicas in this deployment. Now, how do you do that? You can do it in many different ways without deleting the whole deployment, recreating it. So one of the ways which we can do it is by saying that, hey, kubectl, and then say edit. If you say that, then what happens, it opens up the Kubernetes deployment definition in YAML format. And if you go a little down over here, you find the replicas here. Now, right now it is having 1. If I make it to 2 and I come out of this and save this, and this is accepted, which means now if I run the deployment, you will see now 2 instances are running instead of 1 instance. Okay. And then if I say get pods, you see 2 pods under the same deployment. You can see the name of the deployment is coming at the beginning of the pod name. The remaining part of the pod is having some random number, which Kubernetes is automatically adding to it. Now, if we take the same approach and going ahead and go and edit the same deployment, and let's say I want to modify this replicas into 3. So if I come to this line and say I want to replace it with 3, and I then come out of this. And if you run this command called get pods, you will find a newly created pod under the same deployment, which is having this age of 3 seconds, that means that's newly created. Now let's assume that the oldest one, which got created when I had only one replica, and then I changed it to 2, and then it came over there. So now say okay, describe deploy my web. If I say that, you will find that you will have 3 desired, 3 updated, 3 total, and 3 available. Okay, so that's the total number of uh, replicas which you can see over here, which are created and running at this point in time. Now, if I see the list of pods and take the oldest pod and go ahead and kill it. So how to kill that? K delete pod, and then I give the name of the pod. Now this pod will be deleted. Now once this pod is deleted, and if I run the same command to get the pod, I still see 3 pods running under the same deployment, but the one which I deleted, it's 8v4sl, is no more in this list. So you can see that the 3-minute old pod is right now cleaned up and not available. Instead of that, we have a newly created pod, which is a 7-second. That's the new one, which is FW. So there was nothing called FW. There was 4Z. 4Z remains, but new pod immediately gets created. So that's what deployment does. So deployment takes care of the health of the pod within that, and then it keeps replacing the pod if there is any pod having issue with the node, etc., for any reason, and then it'll have a newly created pod available for you. Thank you very much. All right, let's understand levels. Now, you have seen me creating deployment and pods. Now, if you create a default pod, let's say you go ahead and want to create a pod, what happens that pod basically adds a level into that. Now, what is that level is? So let's first create a pod. So I'll say k run nginx1, and I use image nginx. And I just create this pod just like that. Now, if you say k describe pod nginx1, you see on top of this describe option, you have something called levels. Okay, so by default, Kubernetes adds a level called run equal to nginx because we use run command to create this pod, but you can add your own levels into that, right? So you can use kubectl level. If you use that, right, and then if you use help, you see that it basically allows you to add level to a pod, right? And then to all the pods, to a specific pod, right? And to a pod, and then add, let's say, whatever level you want to add into that. So if you see here, I can add a level called status unhealthy to the pod foo. That's what it is saying. So let's see how we can do that in this pod. Now we have this nginx1 that's under development. Okay, so we are creating it inside the development. So let's give a level which indicates that. So what I can do, I can say k level pod nginx1, and then I use this thing as environment equal to development. If I do that, now if you see k get pod, I use describe pod nginx1. If I say so, then you go on top of this, you find a new level called environment is added apart from this run nginx1. Okay. Now, if I go ahead and create one more pod, that pod basically will have something like the same thing. So let's say I will have this level run nginx1, and then I say 2. And in this second pod, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to change this environment to production. Okay. And then I say this nginx2 becomes production, right? Now k get pods will have 2 pods, and then to show the levels, you see the levels. You see now we can see the levels with the pod in the output itself instead of going into the describe. Now I have 2 pods. Each of them will have environment key and a value, development and production. Now I can add another level into my newly created pod, that is nginx2, and let's say I give a project code 2123. Okay, so you now run this show levels command, you see the project code is added. Now I don't see this run thing is relevant anymore, right? Because it means nothing to me at this point in time. I want to remove that pod. You can level from the pod. You can do that. So you can say k levels pod nginx And then once you do that, what happens is that it basically goes ahead and removes the pod level from this pod just by mentioning the run level and say minus instead of S, I need to level. Now what happens? That is gone. So if you see here, show levels, there is no run. I can do it for the next one. Same way, just I need to make it 2. And then the second node will have no levels for run. So I have only the meaningful levels, which are part of my pod listing. Now, I can also display the pods which are basically having a specific level. So k get pod, and then I say selector or minus L, and then I say environment equal to development. If I say so, then I see only one pod because I have tried to uh, get only one pod. Now, if I have more than one pod having the same level, then it will definitely display them. But right now, I have only one pod. So that's how you can add a level to an existing pod, remove a level, or you can filter them by using this minus L in the query and then give the level name, and that will give you the list of resources which has got this level. So it becomes easier. So if you have, let's say, one namespace, but that holds both production and development workload, and if you differentiate them with a level, you can actually filter them out with a level and then do some common activity if you have to do some common activity. So with this, thank you very much. Right, now let's understand the namespace and how we can use namespace to create resources within that and then create some sort of, let's say, container under which we'll have all the resources created. So let's see the namespace. Now, by default, Kubernetes uses a default namespace. If you use NS, that's the short form of namespaces, you get to see the list of namespaces available. And these are all default namespaces which gets created when you create a Kubernetes cluster. Now, this is the default namespace, and by default, my kubectl is connected to this default. And the moment you create a pod and mention nothing about namespace, it'll go ahead and create the pod. Now, if you say get pod, right now we do not have any pod in the default namespace. That's what it says. But if you, let's say, get me all the pods running in all the namespaces, then you find all the namespaces, all the pods and from all the namespaces showing up, right? Because default doesn't have anything, so it doesn't show, but other namespaces has the pod running. So to see and work on that, you would explicitly tell about the namespace. Now let's see how we can first create a namespace. So to create a namespace, what you need is that a create ns my ns. If you do that, the my ns namespace gets created. So if you now see the list, you have the my ns namespace available. Now, if you want to see what all pods we have over there, so if you say get pods namespace my ns, there is no resource found. That's fine because we just now have created the namespace. Now let's create a pod within this namespace. So k run, let's say nginx image nginx dash dash namespace equal to ns. There is no ns, there is my ns. Okay, now the pod is created. Now if you run the previously executed command to see what all pods running in my ns namespace, now you see the namespace running. Now if you say get pod, you don't find any pod running in the default namespace. But if you run this with all namespaces, now you see within the my ns you have this Nginx namespaces available, right? So you now have the ability to really go into the namespace and then start looking into the namespace part. Now, if you keep creating resources within the namespace, let's say you create the second pod just by adding one more pod, krun pod, that's the command we ran before, and let us give a second pod called nginx2. The second pod is created, so I say get pods and namespace my ns. Okay, if you just type that out, let me just run this, and you see two pods are now running. Now, one of the good things about namespace is that you can keep creating everything within a namespace, and once you are done with your work and you need to clean up everything, you can just delete the namespace. So let's say k delete ns my ns. If you say so, then what happens? Everything which is available within the namespace my ns will be deleted. Now it will make sure all the resources are cleaned up, right? Garbage collected, and then the namespace will also be deleted from the list of namespaces in Kubernetes cluster.